Hello everyone! Today we are going to be learning about how we classify plants. This is our first lesson of our new science unit. So let's go ahead and get started. How do we classify plants? So the first way to classify plants are knowing or determining if it's flowering or a non-flowering plant. Flowering plants are plants that make flowers. And the job of the flower is to make seeds that will grow new plants. Remember we talked about that with our structures of plants? The flower helps reproduce and grow new plants. And then non-flowering plants are plants that do not make flowers. However, even though they don't have flowers, some still make seeds. But instead of seeds being made in the flowers, they are made in cones in the non-flowering plants. And we'll get more in depth with that. So here are two examples of some flowering plants. And there's seeds in the very center of the flowers. So every time you see a flower, a colorful flower on a plant, it is a flowering plant, no matter what. But this is what non-flowering plants look like. They're typically just completely green. You might see some brown on them sometimes because of the cone or other things growing on it. But typically it's just all green, no colorful flowers or anything like that. So two examples of non-flowering plants that we're going to be talking about are moss, which is right here, and ferns. And I want to point out that the leaves on the ferns are called fronds. So, they both start with the letter F, so that's kind of easy to remember. Ferns, fronds. Just remember that the fronds are what the leaves are on the ferns. And remember that these plants have spores instead of seeds. So these plants don't have seeds, but they have spores. And you guys are probably wondering, what in the world are spores? A spore is a tiny part of a fern that can grow into a new plant. So spores have the same function as a seed. However, they are two different things. A spore is not a seed. They are two different things. And spores form in small groups on the underside of the fronds. So this is the bottom of the frond, which is the leaf of the fern. And so they look like little black pores, and they have the same function as seeds, which are to reproduce and make new plants. A little fun fact, did you know that the word spore comes from the Greek word spora, which means seed? So let's talk about how a spore is like a seed. So here are the two pictures, and so both are structures made by plants that make new plants. So like I just said before, spores and seeds are two different things, as you can see, but they do perform the same function, which is making new plants. So let's go ahead and do a little true-false activity. So number one, it says spores are seeds. Is that true or false? You can say it out loud. It is false. Like we just talked about, spores and seeds are two different things. They look completely different. Number two, spores are found in cones. Think about that. False. So number three popped up. But spores and cones are found in two different kinds of flowering plants. They will never be together on the same plant. Number three says ferns make flowers. Think about what kind of plant you see a fern on and what kind of plant you see a flower on. So the answer is false, because you will find ferns on non-flowering plants, and you will find flowers on flowering plants. And the next one, mosses do not make seeds. The answer is true. Remember, moss and ferns both make spores. They don't have seeds. All right, so let's do a quick little review about everything we talked about. So there are many ways to classify plants, as you can see. So the first way to classify a plant is to determine the kind of the plant. Plants can be sorted into many different types, such as vines, shrubs, trees, color, anything like that. And then the next way to classify a plant is if it's a flowering plant. Many flowering plants have flowers that can make seeds, and flowering plants are the largest group of plants. So there are more flowering plants than non-flowering plants in the world. And the next one is non-flowering plants with cones. Plants with cones do not make flowers, but they do make seeds. Seeds form inside of the cones. So remember, one of our true-false questions were that ferns form inside cones, and that was incorrect because seeds form inside cones. And then the second kind of non-flowering plant are non-flowering plant with spores. Some plants make spores but do not make seeds. Spores make new plants. Perfect. So those are the 4 different categories of plants. All right, so let's go over this problem. It says Kareem learned that some plants reproduce with spores rather than seeds. Which of the following plants uses spores instead of seeds to reproduce? Is it a maple tree, moss, rosebush, or sunflower? Go ahead and hold up your finger. All right, the answer is B, moss. We didn't talk about any of those other kinds, so hopefully you said moss because we talked about that moss uses spores instead of seeds. The 2 plants that we talked about that use spores instead of seeds are moss and ferns. Awesome job. All right, so that is our review for our science quiz. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the Q&A channel. Or if you have any other concerns, please feel free to ask me. All right, I'll talk to you guys soon.